Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Berta Rafael from Mozambique, and I work for Centro Terra Viva. It's a national non-government organization. So in this webinar, I want to share what is happening here in our country. And I will bring to the one case from Palma district in north of Mozambique. So I will try to talk slowly. My English is not is for other speakers. It's not the same, but okay. I will start giving the context. Mozambique has great potential in terms of natural resources, such as land, forestry, marine resource, wildlife, and mineral, such as coal, mineral, heavy sands, gas, ruby, graphite, gold, and others. And he's seeing a growing presence of large companies exploiting them, a positive side for the progress of the economy and the promotion of social welfare. The exploitation of part of this resource implies the occupation of large area of land, mostly in rural communities, often involving involuntary physical and economic resettlement. And in our country, women are the ones who use lands, especially in rural areas. On the other hand, our country is particularly vulnerable to climate change due to its geographical location in the intertropical we are in lower altitude. We're talking about 2,000 meters from the sea level. About 44% of our territory. So all the plans are about 250,000 meters square. So you can imagine the effects of climate change are already being felt in Mozambique. And the most recent cyclones, Idai, Kenneth, Fred, Gombe, Anna, etc., are examples of these. Floods resulting from above normal rainfall, cyclical droughts, are other climate effects recording in our country. And consequently, the death of hundreds of people, the destruction of various infrastructure, the displacement of family, and the loss of their property, amongst others. Climate change is caused by natural causes, but most of them are coming from people by anthropogenic activity, emission of greenhouse gases, forest degradation, both the exploitation of natural resources and the effect of climate change leads affected families to restrict their access to land and other resources, the main source of their livelihood. Now I want to talk about some implications, especially in Palma case, in Palma district, where we have a company a gas company. Okay. In Palma district, as a result of the resettlement of the gas company, several communities were affected by the involuntary resettlement process. Here in Mozambique, resettlement involves moving part of the family from their area to another area where the same or better condition must be created according to our regulation. The displaced families, talking in Palma district, around more than 600 families. Mostly are fishermen, including women. All of those peoples have lost their lands. They lost access to the sea and other resources that provide their livelihoods. The distance from the sea to the displacement place has increased from 700 meters to 14 kilometers from the sea. So you can imagine the big challenge facing by these people. The fishing site is Salama, where everyone was fishing, because it is close to the company's area. They are limited hours. First, because it's far. Second, they need to get lift from the company transportation. So if the workers from the company, it's time to go out, they take all of them from the community to go out. So you can see they don't have the free time, the free access to the sea. So what's that? We can say those people, they lost their land. They lost their resource. And in context of climate change, is big issue, because according to our National Institute for Disaster, indicate that problem from the climate change will continue. So we are talking about people who lost their resource, their land, and they are not only for who lost the land because of the resettlement. We are talking too about the community who receives this family or this community who was resettled. So the quality of soil, the quantity of soil are becoming reduced. And we are talking about climate change. I don't know what will be the future of this community or family, special women, because is women who most use or land, is most who produce food for their family. So that's what I wanted to share. In order to safeguard against and reduce the impact of climate change on the resettlement process, maybe it's necessary and urgent to incorporate it to the planning process action on the different players. I'm talking about government, civil society, citizens in general. It's necessary involvement of the community in the decision-making process. That means that those people, those communities need to be prepared and civil society can play this role. It's necessary to take a participatory planning into accounting the climate vulnerable to which the country is subject. We need maybe the land use plan from the community, even land use plan, district for district, considering. Hello?
Hello, we can hear.
You can hear, okay. It's necessary to create a space for women's participation, respecting their rights, cultural and custom of communities. It's necessary to identify alternative resources that are easy to adapt to in the short term. I'm talking about who are resettled, need to find what to do, how to quickly have food, special food. It's necessary to implement community development project, environmental education, capacity building for all stakeholders, and exploit resource in places where there is no greater concentration of population. This is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Berta. It's devastating, in fact, to hear about what the women and their communities are facing at the moment in Mozambique, already being extremely vulnerable to the climate crisis, as you were saying, and now facing land grabs as well from the gas projects. Clearly, this is not the way to go, and this is really going to land people into severe crisis. So alternatives are needed, as you were saying, and the women need to be listened to as well. So thank you so much for sharing that experience. I'd like to pass now to Patrick Adema, who's going to speak to us also about oil and gas expansion, particularly about the East African crude oil pipeline and the impacts that it will have on women and their communities should this devastating pipeline be built. Patrick, I'm passing over to you.
Thank you, Tricia. I'm trying to connect the video. I hope my network will be well. My name is Patrick Edema, and I work with the Africa Institute for Energy Governance, a Uganda national-based organization that works to influence energy policies that benefit the poor and the vulnerable Ugandans. But we also work with the communities, particularly those that are affected by the oil and gas developments, to desist or to campaign against these environmentally destructive projects that undermine environmental conservation, human rights, and climate change mitigation. Of course, as we are aware, we know climate change is an emerging issue at the entire continent, and we know that the countries that are emitting less are the ones that are suffering the consequences. In Africa, Africa as a continent contributes only 3% of these greenhouse gas emissions, and most of the emissions that are leading to the rise of climate change in Africa are from the global north countries. And these are the same countries that are coming to Africa to explore fossil fuels and other environmental destructive related activities that are impacting the voiceless local communities that are suffering from the land rights abuses, environmental abuses, and the compensation. I will talk about the oil developments in Uganda. Some of the key major oil developments in Uganda, we have the Tilenga oil project, which is located within Mashoni Falls National Park. And we know that the East African crude oil pipeline will be transporting this crude oil from these oil developments from Uganda to Tanzania. And in Uganda, it will pass through 10 districts, of which the pipeline is about 1,443 kilometers. So the ECO, I know we've had a lot media and everywhere how it is impacting both communities, but also on a critical biodiversity in Uganda. The ECO, first of all, if you look at where it's located, like where the crude oil will be extracted, over 464 oil wells are located within Action for National Park, which is one of the major contributors of foreign exchange through tourism. In Uganda's economy, tourism is among the main contributors of foreign exchange of about 1.6 US billion US dollars. And this sector, tourism, is employing over 660,000 people, both directly and indirectly in the sector. This is the sector that does not compromise environmental conservation, but also creating opportunities to the local communities, especially from the informal sector, to provide a source of living through, because when a woman in a community starts up a small shop where these tourists come to visit these beautiful elephants and chimpanzees, they will pass by to buy some soft drink because of the climate change. Uganda most times is so hot, so it's an opportunity for them. But if you look at the expense at which these oil and gas developments have come, they've totally worsened the livelihoods of these communities. I'll give an example. If you look at the Mashoni Falls, which is one of the biggest national park in Uganda, uh, the Mashoni Falls before never had roads passing through. And before, people would enjoy going and watching these animals, looking at lions, elephants. But now when these projects came in, they constructed a road within the Mashoni Falls. And the habitat of this wildlife has been destroyed. And when you pass through this national park, you'll find that lions are on the road, and they've documented some of the instances where these animals have killed the people. In the last month, we had also some cases from the communities around Mashoni Falls where these oil projects are. And because their habitat was destroyed, these wild animals, particularly these elephants, they go to the communities' gardens and eat their crops, and which has posed a threat to food insecurity to the communities. And we should understand that these are local communities that are so voiceless, that are not heard, their cries are always not heard. We have a scenario where from the Tilenga oil project, the communities asked the government to increase the compensation for them. And when they refused the unfair compensation, the oil companies, that is the Total Energies, that worked with the government through the Auditor General, again, they took these communities, these people who rejected the compensation, to court. And court ruled that their money should be deposited in the court, so that the project should continue. And they were forcefully evicted from their land. So you find that people are really suffering a lot of injustices and environmental injustices. when you look at the East African crude oil pipeline, it's going to displace over 100,000 people. In Uganda, I said it's passing through 10 districts, and about 178 villages are going to be displaced as a result of this project. The project is not only going to displace the homes and the people from their land, but it is also passing through critical biodiversity. If you look at the wetlands, the ECOP is passing through about 158 wetlands, of which some of them are of national importance. If on the 158 wetlands, you find that 17 are draining into the Lake Victoria. About around 8, they're also draining into the Lake Albert. This is a shared natural resource between Uganda and DRC, which is employing about 200,000 people that are depending on fishing. So in case of any oil spill, or in case of any accident related to oil spill as a result of oil and gas, it will not only affect the livelihoods of these people who depend on this lake, but also the aquatic life of the fish. We've had scenarios of Nigeria that started its exploration in 1958. If you look at how these communities around the oil fields, how they are experiencing their lives, I mean, they are really suffering. There is a report I read from Nigeria, and it was indicating that people around the oil fields are having breast cancer, especially ladies, women. And this is more or less different that will happen in the case of Ugandans. Now, the issue of Uganda, especially on women, if you look at from the commencement or from the initial stages of land acquisition, one of the problems we have, or one of the challenges we have in Uganda is that these women sometimes they don't legally own land. So when you get married, most times it's a husband who owns land. So during these processes of land acquisition, in most cases, the compensation is given to husbands. And you know men, how they behave when you've not sensitized them. You find that most of the local communities have grown up without even having like 2 million Ugandan shillings in their pocket. So if you give them 5 million shillings that they've never handled in their entire life, they will misuse it. There is a case of the oil refinery in back in 2012, where about 7,018 people were displaced as a result of the oil refinery project. And this land where these people were dislocated or they were displaced, a government proposes to construct an oil refinery of about 60,000 barrels of refined oil per day, but also constructing Kabale International Airport. So these people, we work with some of the women that were affected by this project, and most of them are now single mothers, that when men got the money, they abandoned them and they married other young girls. And these ladies are now suffering with their children. Children are dropping out of school because men don't care. If they get money and they get a second wife, they will abandon the old wife and go with the young girl because they have money. And most of them, when they got this money, especially men, they started business and they were not trained how to use this money. So you find that they used the money, instead of using the profits again to invest in the business, they were using the same money they are having to put the business, and they eat it. Within 2 years, the money was done, and now they are renting. Because in 2019, we tried to, as a FIEGO, as African Institute for Energy Governance, tried to conduct a research to see how these people who were displaced and went into different districts, how they are now coping up with life. And the research indicated that 96% of these people who were dislocated or displaced from their land are suffering. They have nowhere to stay. And these are people who opted for in-kind compensation. In-kind compensation is when you agree that instead of giving me cash money, maybe get for me somewhere and construct for me the land, I mean the house. So these people who accepted in-kind compensation are now living in a camp-like area. They were constructed houses of the same fashion, 2-bedroom houses within a small piece of land. And you find that those who had land where they could grow crops, where they could rear animals, right now they cannot do that because they don't have any big land or any big portion of land so that they can grow crops for their children. In Uganda, over 70% of the Ugandans depend on agriculture. And this is a sector where a majority of the population are women that are depending on subsistence sector where they can get a living for their house and also children. But you find that these people are put in a small contained area where they no longer have an option of maybe digging to get some money that can provide something to eat from home, but also getting school fees for the children. So this has resulted to a number of children, especially girls, becoming pregnant, dropping out of schools. And this is not only of the oil and gas developments and the mega oil projects. We've seen, I didn't share the presentation, but there are scenarios where these people from the companies impregnate these ladies and they run. So you find that a woman produces a baby or a son or daughter, and the daughter has no father. Or the son doesn't know the father because after impregnating them, these people run. We've seen this in other mega uh, big projects like the electricity sector for the Karuma hydropower dam, where some of the Chinese have impregnated some women and they've run back. And these Chinese are also investing in these oil and gas development. Sinopec is a is a Chinese company that is investing in the Kingfisher oil project. And these cases are happening, and these are communities that whose voices cannot be heard, mainly women. If you look at the issue of climate change, Uganda, we already experienced the wrath of climate change. In the recent months, the floodings, people have fled from the Kasese district because of the floodings. And the East African crude oil pipeline is going to meet about 34 million metric tons of carbon per year. But the world is focusing on the eco. But there is also the Telenga, which is expected to produce about 45 million metric tons of carbon house gas emissions per year. And if you look at the lifespan of this oil and gas development that will be, that will run for about 25 to 30 years, I mean, if you were to calculate the amount of greenhouse gas emission that will be emitted, this is too much because even before, before the commercialization of these projects, we find that we are already suffering from the effects of climate change. People are dying, people are losing their property, people are they no longer know the right seasons when to plant. A few years back, you could know that maybe in February and June, this is when I have to plant my crops, and by this time I'll be harvesting. Now the seasons have changed. You can't tell which season you need to plant. And apart from these rich people who can use the irrigation schemes, the water irrigation schemes, and then they know whether it's a sunny time or what, they can still plant and grow crops. So in Uganda, we are so alone, like we are so blessed with other green alternative activities that has the potential to improve the livelihoods of these women. If you look at the renewable energy sector, this is a sector which has the potential to provide about 5 million jobs of the people in Uganda, including the women. But if you look at the commitment of government, saying that, yes, Ugandans, women, you are going to benefit from this oil and gas developments, and the project is going to, can you imagine just providing 160,000 jobs to Ugandans according to government, the ECOP. But if we are to compare the number of jobs that are being employed in these green other alternative sectors, if you look at fisheries, more than 600, look at tourism, more than 676,000 jobs. Look at the renewable energy sector, about 5 million jobs to the Ugandan. If you look at the agriculture, the best, the top earning sector in Uganda. I mean, these are green sectors that have the potential to improve and ensure that livelihoods of these women are improved. But government is prioritizing in these fossil fuel developments that are undermining the conservation and protection of the livelihoods, the human rights of these women, and also the climate change mitigation. Sometimes, as we see it, we think that at the end of the day, what is the impact or what is the purpose of this the Paris Agreement? What is the purpose of the national determined contributions? What is the purpose of this African Climate Summit? That as we are talking about the climate change, countries are just opening doors for the fossil fuel development. They are not looking at how these communities are suffering. They are looking at the profits. Look at the global north companies that are coming to Africa to exploit our natural resources. They are focusing on the profits that they can get. In Uganda, we are already burdened with high debts. Each Ugandan as per now always about 1.5 million Ugandan shillings. Even these young kids, because of the high debt burdens. And this project of the ECOP, I mean, government is want to get some funds as debts to invest in this project such that it can recover the profits. But we've seen case studies from countries that started investing in oil and gas way back. And these countries are not benefiting from the resource. 2 weeks back, I got an opportunity to participate in the launch of the Uganda's Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. That is EITI. The government was launching the EITI second report. And the consultant that conducted this EITI exercise, I mean, in the report, it indicated how there are a lot of discrepancies, even in the management of these small capital gain taxes that we are getting, the bonuses. The government is already misusing them. We have scenarios where government was because there is a law in place that guides how these capital gain taxes, how these bonuses that are put in the petroleum fund by the government, how they are supposed to be utilized. But we have got stories and reports where government is getting this money that is supposed to be invested in infrastructure and development, and it is investing it to for the budget deficit. So this government, even the small resource, the small revenues from the capital gain taxes, the bonuses, and others, government is mismanaging them. So in the whole context, these fossil fuel projects are way much worse than what people expect. And the only alternative we can look at, let's focus on economic alternatives. If we are to help the women out there, if we are to help these indigenous women, the girls who are dropping every day and now from school and becoming pregnant, we need to work together. We need to support these frontline communities, women that are coming at the forefront, to engage and to call for the stopping of investment in fossil fuels. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. That was great. There's a lot that actually touched me, I think, from your presentation, and a lot that made sense. And the two things that I particularly picked up, which I think is quite important, is the one is that this oil exploration is happening in ecologically fragile territories, in fact, territories that are natural heritage sites. And so that, that is really quite a devastating thing. And then the second thing I think that was, I thought was particularly insightful, I think, was this issue around women's land rights and how women don't tend to have land rights in Uganda and lots of other places across the region. And even though they work off the land, they live off the land, what happens is that the land can end up being sold by the men who actually have the land rights, leaving women completely displaced and devastated by this. So thanks so much for picking up on those issues. I'd like to pass to Maria Matthieu. Maria, over to you on some of the solutions. Can you point to some of the real solutions that we need, some of the women's solutions that we need, and maybe pointing to how this relates to climate finance. Thanks, Maria. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Tricia. After a detailed presentation from Patrick, not sure if I'll be able to fit in that space. But anyways, I truly believe that most of us agrees in a situation and condition and circumstances that African as a continent collectively is facing at the moment is undeniable fact that there should be solutions which are coming from the African solution, African people themselves, with understanding of the challenges of the climate change, but also with the realities of what we are facing right now is taking us back to years of what some of us read in history books as slavery, and is what actually is happening now. And it's very saddening to see the reality of the moment, despite of the rule of law that we speak about, the human rights that we preach every other day, and still some superpowers, big powers, use the same loopholes within the same laws, within the same strategies and plans which have been placed, probably, I'm made to believe, intentionally, again, to conquer Africa. And somewhere it's relieving to see that there's awakening from African people. And there's a calling for solidification, or rather solidarity from African people, to see how now this has to stop. And it has to stop not necessarily by costing our lives, but it has to stop within the same rights that have been preached and need to be implemented for interest of Africa. So as speakers have spoken about, the number of natural resources that continue to be exploited, the number of pieces of land that are being grabbed in African continent, we have the solutions. And I think it's time now for the world to listen to these solutions. And the reason for this counter COP is, again, to see that when we are convened in these luxurious spaces with enormous amount of financing being vested to discuss and to find solutions, years later, counting this is going to be COP28, and yet, instead of having at least interventions to what was happened initially, we are still seeing more loss of African resources, and now in a speedy way than what it was happening initially. So part of what we do believe, and I believe most of us have having these conversations, is African voices should be respected, and the respect of African voices not necessarily should be coming from our government leaders. We entrusted them with that power, and we do believe when they sit in the positions of power, they know behind what Africans are suffering. So that's, we leave it on their hands while we are pushing for them, or rather working with them to see that they are not alone, but we together are looking into those solutions. And this is from a person who are living in a sham, living in a slum, to those who are sitting in the four corners of the offices. And with looking into the land issues, for instance, we should not continue to let the policies and every other day having the reforms which continue to plunder the land from African women, from African communities. And we should not continue to have the silos of laws and policies which are implemented by one limb speaking on the other language and the other limb speaking on certain language. So for instance, if we're speaking about climate change, and then again, there's something spoke about environment, and here again, there's another one speaking about land issues. There's no cohesion of a language, whereas one common solution for a certain community do really understand. The jargon and the language that is used to an African woman or an African young person or an African chief probably is not the same language can be used to those rooms where the solutions are being made. So the language which is being put forth in these negotiations should be simplified in a manner that people do understand what is their converse. And when we are talking about I really don't want to look at the policies and the structures, but when we are talking about those policies and structures and having all the lineup of decision makers, those decision makers vested with the power to work with the communities, they should be able to hear the concern and the solutions that are coming from those communities. But again, without power, which is coming collectively from African people, from African communities, now and again, we continue to have the silos of these big powers continue to separate the efforts of African continent. But as I'm speaking from you here, we're sitting in this assembly, Women Climate Change Assembly, and it's amazing solutions that you're hearing from women in different communities in in Africa, speaking about the challenges that they're facing, the areas that they were able to secure their livelihood, the amount of pollution which is happening in those localities, and yet the limited support, or sometimes not support at all from the entrusted governments. So we are calling to our governments again, the policies which has been put forth, it's not for them to be shelved, but it's for them to be implemented. There should be a coherence between policies and implementation on the ground. And when these policies are being implemented, the voices of those on the ground who knows what they're suffering for should be put forth. And when we are looking into fair, prior, informed consent, there should not be just songs which are sung by multinational corporations so they can continue to conquer Africa, so they can continue to get more financing from financing institutions, but rather they should be implemented. And if they're not implemented, there are those mechanisms they put for themselves. And here we are tasking our governments again. If these multinational corporations truly, we believe they are not for our interest and for the development of our people, then it has to stop. We should not continue to be beggars of paying loans and debts of millions and billions of money. Nigerians, for instance, gave their experience. The debt which is in this country, it has to be paid for 7 generations to come. I don't know about other countries because this is the discussion of its own. So we cannot continue to put our generations indebted with debts which are not bringing any solutions to our continent. And here now I'm bringing in the issues financing. The financing that we speak about, and we always go to this, they go, at least I'm not there. They go to negotiations. We have our negotiators from Africa, but yet you find out the percentage that is coming to Africa is relatively that which we are begging. I call it begging because if this is not what African continent has caused for itself, why time repeatedly we have to go there seeking for financing while it should be just automatically? This has to be collective efforts from the polluters themselves to ensure that African continent is not suffering what we are currently suffering. But again, it's very interesting read I was able to go through. I don't remember the title exactly. I'll share later. Whereas when we are seeking of million, thousands that has to be paid from the polluters, it's actually interesting to learn that that amount of money is just going through the tax evasion, is going through the taxes, of course, which are not paid from the same polluters. And if you calculate the amount of money which goes out of African continent, it's maybe 10 or 100 times from what we are asking for. So here I'm calling again for our systems, the government as well, we as civil society, to put our government into task to ensure the tax evasion and the taxes which are not paid by the investors, they should be paid. When we're giving them tax holidays and yet there's so much which is not being taxed, and there's still amount of debts which we still continue to pay with exorbitant interest. This is not right for an African person. Increasingly, there are going to be scarcity, food security issues, which you are still observing. And we are still facing the food sovereignty. We do not have our traditional seeds. They are disappearing. So there's so much which is happening within our power within us as African, which we have collectively to struggle, not to struggle, to collectively put our voices to say that this is what we as an African, we want. So as now we're having this counter COP, not that we are rejecting or refusing what has been negotiated, but we are saying it's time for us, me as a regular person, as a normal citizen in my country, to claim what I believe is my right, to claim what I believe should not be taken from me, the land which my ancestors harvested, put in place for years. It should not be taken because now there's the natural resources which is underneath. And if then there is a need for us to have this development, yes, then development should take into consideration the rights of the people who are residing into those respective areas, the rights of the people which are enshrined in this legal instrument, the right of the people which do not take away their dignity, the right of people which do not expose them to poverty, but the right of people which truly take into account all the rights that we as an African, within our power, we believe is what we want to see within our continent. The joy, the happiness, the laughter, the collective engagement as an African common citizen should not be taken away from us because of the sake of development. The African continent, then it was plundered by our chief. We give an excuse they are not able to read and write, but now we can read and write. We see the contracts, we understand the contracts. We should continue to critically analyze those documents and not to stop taking this into our corridor of powers, questioning and asking and stopping where we have to stop. But then we have collectively mobilized the efforts of communities, because there's so much which is happening in a community that if we are not really holding our hands together as an African without seeing the divide and rule, which again sometimes come through even the financing that we are receiving, the fund which is coming to us in a civil society, but we have to see this funding is coming so that we can be able to mobilize our resources, mobilize our efforts, mobilize our efforts so that we can speak in a collective voice. But again, the financing which is trickling to climate issues, it should not be a case of us seeking, asking, demanding. Of course, we have to demand, that's what we have to do, but begging, but rather working with our government, making them understand Africa is for us Africans. If we keep on collecting these debts and loans every other day, we do not have the Africa that we're aspiring to see. So maybe I'll stop here to allow the conversation to take through, and we'll engage.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks for that very passionate presentation. That was fantastic. I think it was very clear, the message about stopping the conquering of Africa's resources and paying the climate debt. I think those things are critically important and they're connected to each other. So we have maybe about 5 minutes to open up for questions and comments. If you'd like to pose a question to one of our speakers or make a comment, please do raise your hand and we'll get to you. Portia, you can go ahead. Portia, you have the floor. Please, you can unmute yourself. Okay, I'm not sure what's going on. Portia, can you hear me? You have your hand raised. You need to go off mute to be able to speak. Okay, I'm not sure what's happened with her. Is there anyone else that would like to? Oh, hello. There we go. Hi. Hi.
Okay, so Trisha, this is Portia from Ghana. We did a research work some time back on renewable energy in Ghana. I can really relate to the Uganda story because it's happening across and it's similar to what we are also facing. But my question is, beyond the research, how do we help these people? And how best can we share our practices to be able to help these issues that we've been able to see or identify, to build the capacity of these people in these communities to that level? Thank you.
Thank you, Portia. Is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question? Portia, you put your hand up again. I'm not sure why. Is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question? Okay, I'd like to give it back to our speakers. Berta, do you have any final thoughts and response maybe to Portia as well? Berta, can you hear me?
Yes. Not. I don't have
any thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay, Patrick, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah. Yes. I don't know whether I'm heard well. In response to Portia's question, Trisha, am I audible enough?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. one of the reasons why we do research, especially on these sectors that we know they help out those local communities, women, is to use them as advocacy strategies. Um, for the case of the oil refinery, like the way I explained, how these women were displaced from their land in 2012, and then we made a research in 2019 to see how they are coping up. These people who are displaced that didn't consider any kind of compensation, the women and the men, we realized that as I said, that 96% of the people were living more worse than how they used to be before the project came in their communities. So this research, we used it for the ECOP, for the community that are located within the Greater Masaka region, because the oil refinery project is within the Bunyoro region. So this is the research we used to engage these other communities in the Greater Masaka region, telling them, see, this is the research we did. And these are the communities that got compensation and they went to different districts, and this is what they are going through. So it opened up their eyes to reject what is unfair to them, and also to ask for what is fair to them, but also looking at the issue like for renewable energy. We use this research as an advocacy strategy to engage our national governments, because one of the issue we are dealing with as per now is to ensure that now we have a solar energy policy in Uganda. We have renewable energy policies, but when you ask government, no, look, you are focusing on fossil fuels. These are environmentally destructive activities. And government will say, look, we have renewable energy policies. We've invested in hydropower, which is a renewable energy. But in Uganda, hydropower is more or less than a data source of energy. One, when in the initial stages, they have to displace people for these big hydropower dams. And even at the time of commissioning, the electricity tariffs remain high. So these local communities, where a majority of Ugandans are within local rural areas and they live below the poverty line, they can't afford this electricity. So this electricity which is generated remains dimmed or redundant. And at the end of the day, because this electricity, I mean, the money we use is from the investor, or we borrow the money from Exim Bank in China, World Bank, we need to pay back this. So we tax, or government taxes this already poor communities to pay for this dimmed power. So we use these researches that we conduct to engage government to say, no, we need this to prioritize fossil, I mean, to prioritize renewable energy, particularly off grid. In early this year, in early February, we used that research as civil societies in Uganda because government had allocated little funds for the renewable energy and energy efficiency sector. And we realized that in the final budgeting, I mean, Parliament increased about 10% of the resource allocations. So these researches sometimes they are so important and key in our advocacy to help women in rural communities who cannot afford this grid-based electricity, who are experiencing the challenges of these fossil fuels projects, to try to twist the government and change government's mind instead of focusing these activities that undermine their human rights and environmental rights and land rights. I mean, we focus on green economic alternatives that can help them to boost their livelihoods. Thank you, Trisha.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I want to pass to Maria to give us some final thoughts.
I don't have much, but other than saying awakening in Africa has really been promising. But of course, there's still a number of silos that we're working in silos in so many different ways. As it has been said in many ways, and the reason of us having Africa Union was not, I think, in vain. There's a reason for that, why it was necessary for Africa to unite. And the unification of Africa will not just be in papers, but in practical. So we have to walk the talk, and it has to start with all of us who believe in this, who knows and who have seen and who continue to see the impact of what is happening right now. So our government leaders might be blind in their own ways, but we should not stop engaging them in all possible ways. And probably the confrontational part might not be working as much, because the powers that we are fighting with, they see beyond our 50 and 100 years. And we have to see beyond 200 years to know, to understand, and to stop the debt in Africa, to claim the Africa that we want. And whichever part of Africa which has not been reclaimed by the polluters, which the land has not been grabbed, our younger generations should understand what is happening right now. And for me, it's a calling for us to unite more and to speak the same voice.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maria. I think with that, we are going to close the session. Thank you so much to all our speakers and to all of you who've attended as well. We hope that you found this session enlightening in some way. You have some takeaways from it, which you can apply to the work that you're doing to try and find solutions, real solutions to the climate crisis, advocate for real solutions to the climate crisis, building counterpower, and stopping the plunder in Africa. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Happy afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.